everybody. So today we're going to be learning about section 5.11, which is ecological footprints. Learning objective for today is that you can explain the variables measured in an ecological footprint. And the essential knowledge is that you know how ecological footprints compare resource demands and waste production required for an individual or for a society. And the suggested skill that we're going to do is data analysis, where you explain what the data illustrates about an environmental issue. So let's first start by talking about what is an ecological footprint. And this is going to be the measure of how much a person or groups consumes. And this is usually going to be expressed in an area of land, is going to be the units. And this is going to kind of take up a bunch of aspects, like the energy that's used for your life, where you live, the timber and paper that's required for your life, food, all of that. So all of this is going to go into how much you consume. And here's going to be the different factors, like I just touched on, because all of these are going to require land. So food production. In order to have a farm, you're going to need land for those animals to live on. The raw materials like wood, metal, plastic, so the things that you consume, the house that you live in. Literally like toilet paper comes from trees, or all of the plastic products that you're going to be consuming would be part of the raw materials. Your housing, which has the raw materials, but also you need energy for your house to keep your house warm. You take up land, which is a habitat had to be destroyed for your home to exist. And then electricity production, which goes into housing, but also like here when you're at school, your existence here contributes to some of the electricity that we have to do. And your ecological footprint is going to be a little bit different based on whether the electricity comes from coal, natural gas, wind, solar, but all of these do go into your ecological footprint. And then the last part is going to be disposing of waste produced. So like the amount of landfill space that takes up. If you have a lot of waste, just with the things that you're consuming, then you're going to need more landfill space in order to take care of that. So when you learn about an ecological footprint, oftentimes the calculators will also tell you your carbon footprint, but these are two different things. And so I want to make sure that you know kind of the difference between them. Ecological footprint, which I just went over, it's measured in land, typically a global hectacre, which is going to be like a biologically productive hectacre, which if you aren't familiar with hectacres, it's about 2.47, about 2.5 acres is going to be one global hectacre. Then your carbon footprint is going to be measured in tons of carbon dioxide produced per year. So your ecological footprint is going to be more like the land, and then the carbon footprint is going to be what your life produces for carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So for example, this is a ecological footprint that if you took biology at Fife High School, you use this website, and we might look at this website as well. But either way, like it will have these things listed, like your ecological footprint, your carbon footprint, and then how much of your ecological footprint is due to your carbon footprint. So these kind of do go hand in hand. Now, carbon footprint, we're going to be looking, it's going to be all of the carbon dioxide released from an individual or groups. Like if we're looking at the carbon footprint of the United States, then we'd look at the whole group. And it's going to be based on what you consume, but also your activities, like your driving, the house that you live in, stuff like that. It's also going to be based on the material goods. Everything that you buy or consume, there was carbon dioxide that was leading to that, whether it's transporting it from where it was made to the store where you bought it. It could also be based on the like carbon dioxide that's outputted from the factory, or the fossil fuels that were used to make the plastic that the container is. Like all of those things are going to be something that contributes to your carbon dioxide. Also the food production. Animals themselves release carbon into the atmosphere, but also it needs to be transported to get to your local grocery store. And then the energy use, the gasoline, the heat, the electricity, that all is going to release a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in order to keep you warm, keep the lights on. So now we're going to look at factors that affect a footprint. So when we get an increased footprint, here's going to be some of the things that cause that. So first of all, an important thing to be aware is that wealth is going to increase your carbon and your ecological footprint. The more money people have, typically the larger their house, the more they're traveling, whether it's cars or airplanes, the more resources they're going to need for their material goods. Usually, if you have money, you're going to buy more things. Another thing that increases your footprint is more meat consumption. The more meat you eat, the more we are going to have the need for roaming area for those animals, for all of the processing in order to get them into a form that you're going to eat. And just like taking care of those, like cows require heating, they require transportation of their food, they release carbon dioxide. So the more meat that you eat, the more your footprint's going to increase. And then also your fossil fuel usage, whether this is heating your house, traveling. Plastic is made from fossil fuels, so the more plastic you use, the more you're going to be releasing into the atmosphere. And then just generally electricity, especially if you're on a grid that's going to be using fossil fuels as a way to get your electricity. Now, factors that decrease your carbon footprint is using more renewable energy use instead of fossil fuels. So wind, solar, hydroelectric. Fun fact, here in Washington, we're pretty fortunate that majority of our energy production actually comes from hydroelectric. So here in Washington, we tend to have a lower energy footprint than some of your average states just because of that. Also, if you use public transportation, instead of you driving your car everywhere, if you use a bus, if you use a light rail, you're going to be having less gas overall because it's going to be one vehicle for many people instead of just one vehicle for one person. Also, if you have more of a plant-based diet, we're able to grow way more plants in a smaller footprint, and it takes less to make those plants grow as opposed to keeping like a cow alive. And also just general like less consumption, having more of a minimalistic life, not consuming tons of things wrapped in plastic, not needing tons of things to be made for you, maybe getting things secondhand, doing less travel, using less energy, like turning off the lights in your house, keeping your heater just a little bit lower. Those are all going to be things that decrease your carbon footprint and your ecological footprint. Now, one of the reasons that we look at footprints, especially here in a developed country like the United States, it's to give us kind of a perspective of if the whole world lived like us. Now, the United States, we are much more developed. We are not going to be like a developing country like many countries in like Africa. And they do not have as large of an ecological footprint as us. So sometimes you'll also see ecological footprints expressed as the number of Earths required if the entire world consumed at the same level of resources as like you as an individual, or maybe as a group, like the country of the United States. Now, USA, we have pretty high ecological footprint. So if the rest of the world lived like the United States, we would need 5.1 Earths to sustain everybody. So we would need 5.1 Earths worth of resources in order to just like keep the world living if everyone consumed at the level that Americans do. So right now, because there are so many less developed countries, they are not going to be using as much of an ecological footprint. We are able to survive with one Earth and the resources available and still make sure that everybody's fed, housed, alive. Well, ideally, that they are fed, housed, alive. Some people don't have access to all those in their communities. But right now, we are surviving with one Earth without totally destroying it. However, if everybody lived like us, we would need more Earths. Like we just would not be able to have the capacity. We would reach our carrying capacity and the planet would not be able to sustain everybody. Now, right now, our current global footprint is 1.85 Earths, meaning that every year we consume 1.85 of what the Earth can produce in a year. So we are having to find means of maximizing some of the production. Like if we were just living off of Earth, we wouldn't be able to live. But if you think of like all the farming production that goes extra in order to make those resources available to us. So we are still currently over consuming. We're able to survive. But especially if you realize the fact that we're going to keep getting more and more developed countries, they're going to be getting more and more affluent. We're going to start seeing this number of Earths required drastically increasing, which is why so many people are concerned with some of these larger exponentially growing countries getting to a more developed level like us. All right, so this is going to be your practice FRQ for 5.11. You're using the suggested skill of explaining what the data implies or illustrates about an environmental issue. So using this graph on this side here, the carbon dioxide emissions per capita, I want you to describe one factor that accounts for the difference in carbon footprint between the United States and Uganda, and explain one environmental consequence of this factor. So that's going to be your practice FRQ for 5.11. These were your notes on 5.11 about ecological footprints.